Warning? Spoilers ahead for the Rings of Power episode 6. The Lord of the Rings. The Rings of Power does elves absolutely no favors. They're now doubly at fault for Sauron's comeback. Even in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, Middle-earth's elves are forced to bear partial responsibility for Sauron's Second Age return. Despite the likes of Galadriel expressing grave concern, Sauron, under the guise of Anatar, was welcomed into the realm of Eregion. The elven smiths were then complicit in crafting the Rings of Power by his design, which flows directly into Sauron's ambitious One Ring plot. Had Eregion simply shown a little more caution letting strangers near their forges, everyone would have been saved a great deal of trouble. The Rings of Power, however, makes elves even more problematic. After the War of Wrath, a garrison of elves was stationed in the Southlands, whose people had once been loyal to Morgoth. These sentries had one job: keep their keen eyes peeled for signs of evil rising anew. Instead, the guards of Ostirith became horribly prejudiced against the humans they surveilled so closely. In the Rings of Power episodes 1 and 2, lines such as, "The blood of those who stood with Morgoth still darkens their veins," and, "Yauv kept watch over the men and women of Turharid." Because of who they still are highlight the elves' discriminatory attitude. In their racially charged hatred, Ostirith somehow missed the suspiciously friendly tavern owner, secretly hiding an evil black sword hilt in his barn. This is despite an identical sword being carved into the stone of Ostirith itself, and despite young Theo discovering the sword without an elf's superior eyesight, hearing and senses. How Lord of the Rings changes if the elves discover Waldreg's sword in an alternate Middle-earth, where the elves don't just assume everyone in the Southlands is a filthy Morgoth supporter, and the Wardens of Ostirith actually discover Waldreg's loyalty to the enemy. How would the Lord of the Rings' future change? For starters, the elves would confiscate the Black Hilt long before Adar invades the Southlands. The relic would likely be sent to Gil-galad in Lindon or Celebrimbor in Eregion, and neither realm would be assailable for such a small army of orcs. With their coveted key out of reach, Adar couldn't transform the Southlands into Mordor instantaneously as he does in the Rings of Power, forcing him into launching an old-fashioned assault which, so long as the Númenóreans still rock up, fails spectacularly. That means Sauron would need to occupy and transform the Southlands himself in the Rings of Power's canon. There's no reason the villain couldn't succeed where Adar failed, but he'd be starting from scratch rather than taking advantage of pre-laid groundwork. Ultimately, losing the Black Sword delays Sauron's Second Age assault on Middle-earth maybe by centuries, but certainly won't derail his schemes or rewrite the Lord of the Rings. Gil-galad reveals another way the elves aided Sauron's return. The Southlands transforming into Mordor on the elves' watch represents a major fail for Ostirith's finest, but it's not the first red flag the Rings of Power has thrown up. Although Tolkien's elves demonstrate a certain degree of arrogance during the Second Age, the Rings of Power pushes their lack of foresight even further, with Galadriel insisting Sauron is still a problem, and Gil-galad, along with every other elf, telling her she's being ridiculous. Had Lindon and Eregion shown the same level of vigilance and doggedness as Galadriel, Adar's orcs, maybe even Sauron himself, could have been snuffed out early. Whatever the elves may or may not have done in the Rings of Power or main, the Lord of the Rings canon, Sauron plaguing Middle-earth was inevitable. Even in defeat, the villain's Maya spirit would have clung on and resurfaced time and time again. Indeed, it was Sauron's own hubris entwining his existence into the One Ring that finally allowed him to be defeated. In a strange way, the elves' carelessness in Eregion was actually a first step in bringing peace to Middle-earth. Maybe the same could be said of how they failed the Southlands in the Rings of Power. Join Amazon Prime, watch thousands of movies and TV shows anytime, start free trial now. The Lord of the Rings. The Rings of Power continues Thursday, Friday on Prime Video.